Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Thrive Beyond Divorce podcast. My guest today is Shelby Timmins from Divorce Done Differently. Shelby, I might let you introduce yourself and explain the name. Why Divorce Done Differently?
Bit of background about me. I was a family lawyer for many years and effectively got to the point where I wanted to try and do something a little bit differently, but keep my, hand in the family law space. And I was talking to my mum about what I could do, and I had been mediating for a number of years. Anyway, the next day I turned up at her place for a cup of tea, and she had come up with the name Divorce Done Differently and drawn my little logo. So it all just went from there, yeah. And then the thoughts about how I was going to structure the business moved from that.
So you are, I think you call yourself a reformed family lawyer.
Yeah, look, I still hold my practicing certificate. I don't do any legal work at all anymore, but I work very closely with a lot of family lawyers.
Okay, and so you work predominantly as a mediator and also in the collaborative divorce process as a coach?
That's right, and a parenting coordinator.
Okay, fantastic. So I imagine that you have been really busy recently dealing probably more with parenting matters and families rather than property settlements.
Yeah, look, I think there's probably, like all family lawyers, there has been a huge influx of calls and inquiries from people that have either got parenting arrangements in place and they're not sure how to manage them with the COVID-19 restrictions, or they're semi-way through a property settlement and they're worried about the impact of fluctuations in valuations, earnings, having a job, all of those things. So there's a lot of fear sitting in behind for people and a lot of worry. So yes, it's been a busy time for us all.
And what are, I guess, what I'd really like to focus on are the issues that you're finding families are experiencing and they're coming to you to talk about in terms of the parenting, because I think that's a really live issue at the moment. And just the creative solutions that people might be coming up with. If you feel okay to give some anonymized examples, I'm sure that our listeners would really love to know how people are working these things out.
And look, I would say to Jennifer that in the last 3 weeks, that has shifted as well, as the government has made various announcements around expectations of people's behaviour and conduct, work requirements, etc. But primarily people are coming worried about safety and the security of their children. And what I mean by that is really from a health aspect. How are they managing who each parent comes into contact with? What are their expectations around what activities people are doing and who is coming and going from their respective homes? And also changeovers. So if changeovers have previously not been happening either from each other's homes, but from school or a public place, how they manage all of that.
So it's really coming down to a safety and health issue.
Yeah. And one of my top tips would be to try and get an understanding of where the other parent is sitting. What are they worried about? Can you talk through what your expectations are or what you're actually doing? I've had clients that are asking for medical certificates for testing of COVID-19. And once we actually talk through what it is that they're worried about, we're able to overcome that and put, arrangements in place that manage those worries. And allow children to see their parents.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a mediator as well and a parenting coordinator, as you know, and these are different issues, but they still seem to have the same underlying issue underneath them, which is a lack of knowledge and fear. And that really, I find in mediations and parenting coordination as well, that sometimes people just need more information. Yeah. And what presents as I don't want this to happen, I don't want the kids to do X, Y, Z, for instance, or go to such and such's house. I can't do that at the moment, but when you really drill down as to what's going on, it's about needing more information about what's actually happening and going on. And I know that something that I've shared with clients when they have these exchanges and you get to this issue is just share with the other parent what you would want to know if it was you. And I find that can really break it down for people. I remember a couple I dealt with in parenting coordination, and one of them felt like they were getting information overload. And the other one felt like they weren't getting enough information. I went, well, you know what that's telling you is that the other parent wants a lot more information than you are giving, and you might, and they feel like you will want that too. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to complain about it. It's just, thank you, that's information, move on. But if you start providing the same level of information that they're giving you, you might find a lot of your problems actually start to dissipate. And that really helped that particular family, because they were just communicating really, really poorly around those things.
And I think that's key what you've just said. And every family that I work with, if we can get the communication right, regardless of COVID-19, if we can get that right, we're setting a platform for them for success, because issues will arise in life, especially if you've got small children, as they progress through the next 5, 10, 15 years. You are going to have to communicate, find some way that you can share information with each other that meets the needs that you each have. And I only had this morning an inquiry from a colleague around, I've got one client that is wanting lots of information and the other one that wants to keep it fairly brief. And I often talk to families around structuring their communication. And I know that seems a little artificial, but if you've got that structure and each of you comply with it, then you will share the information that you each need. So, you know, talking around, whether it's a weekly email, whether it's using some form of parenting app, whether it's a telephone call or a video link like we are, just making sure you've got structure to that. What are the areas that you need information on? Is it health? Is it schooling, homeschooling? How are we managing it? Is it medical care, extracurricular, all of those things? And if you can keep that structure, and I encourage my clients to use dot points so that we don't get into this war and peace banter. And a really helpful tip that came out of actually the parenting coordination training for me was using the concept of for your information. So FYI, I'm sharing this with you. I don't need any feedback, just dot point information. And then a concept of what I call R&R, where please read it and I need you to reply to it. And be really cautious and realistic around the expectations of time frame.
Yes, I think the timeframes are really important. People can get quite frustrated if they're not getting a response within a time frame they would respect. But if they've never agreed on a time frame, then what is it? And what one person considers reasonable, you can't assume the other person's on the same page. No. I actually use the same technique with my clients, the FYI and R&R. And one thing that I add to it, and it also came from the parenting coordination, is that once you've got the response, you have to accept it and move on. You can't, if you're asking for something, you can't keep going back and asking for the same thing again and again and hoping for a different response.
Yeah. One of the other things I'm finding too, Jennifer, that typically the space that we work in with mediations or collaborative work is that you've set, you know, a meeting time aside, whether that's half a day, a couple of hours. What I'm finding with a lot of the families I'm working with, that they're preferring just at this time of significant change and uncertainty, that they're checking in with me once a week or once a fortnight for an hour. We're setting a time, the topics that they haven't been able to agree on. So it's just a forum for them to facilitate hopefully a fairly constructive conversation. Yeah, so it's changing the way we work.
I can imagine that a whole day mediation by video would be absolutely exhausting for everyone. Even a half day, you know, it's I mean, I don't like me, you probably are spending most of your days on Zoom and jumping between different meetings, and even just seeing yourself on the screen, it's
Is exhausting. I know, I was only talking to my husband yesterday and he said that sounds so vain, but when you're having to watch different people and screens, it is exhausting. So be mindful of that when you're talking to others, when you're talking to each other, and when you're trying to structure up ways to, have a meeting. Just think about what works for you and what might work for the other parent.
Shelby, I'm wondering if you're finding much difference between video or online mediation and telephone mediation.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've done many telephone mediations, but could you comment on the differences between them and how the parties interact?
I think telephone mediations would be, I guess, the least familiar for me. My preference would be either face-to-face or some form of visual communication. That's so that I can see the parties, I can read how they're feeling, some of their body language, if they've got lawyers involved. I think you can gain a lot more from being able to see somebody. I know the feedback from the families that I work with is they get an enormous level of comfort knowing that they can see me. And a lot of the facilities that we're using online allow you to have private meetings, so you can have what we call breakout rooms. So once we talk through with families that this is how it's going to be structured, I often do a trial run with them so that they can walk through on their own with me, the technology, what it looks like, how it works. But I find my preference is video, unless there are significant safety issues or technology is a problem. And I think we all need to be aware that not everybody has a computer, not everybody has Wi-Fi. And as professionals, we need to make it work for the families that are in that heightened emotional state. They need our help and we've got to work around it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Where I just said you and I are using this technology every day, as are most of our colleagues, which means we're used to it. And I've been using video conference technology for a couple of years for sitting on boards and committees. And I remember when I first used it, it was a bit confronting. And I think we have to be conscious that the parties are already dealing with really confronting issues. All of us are dealing with a time in our lives that we never could have anticipated. So we're all in a state of what's called hypervigilism, where we're all on edge. It's hard to concentrate for some people. And on top of that, people have got issues around the safety of their children, and it sounds like they're really focusing on safety and health rather than time. And on top of that, we're saying, hey, and just jump online, use this new technology you've never used before, you'll be fine. And then there's a lot of there's stuff going around in the media about the safety of these platforms, and I just thought I might talk about some of the things that I've implemented so that we can make sure our clients are safer. So the platform that we're using today for this is Zoom, and there's been some bad press around that, but there are some very simple fixes that people can do to make things secure. So the most meetings now default to requiring a password. You can lock a meeting so nobody can Zoom bomb it, I think is the term.
Yes, it is.
And for me, with mediations and parenting coordination, I turn off the chat function because we don't want participants sending each other messages that the mediator or parenting coordinator might not be able to see. And we don't want any file sharing or screen sharing that's not controlled by the host. So there's a lot of things there where I guess we see all the worst case scenarios in the media, but there are certainly things that we as colleagues have been talking about that we can do to make things safe and secure for our parties.
Yeah, and I think for the parents that are involved, being able to say to them, look, and I've done this a lot in recent weeks, once you are connected, it is really up to the host, so whether it's the mediator, the coach, the parenting coordinator, for them to control the technology. So giving them a level of comfort around, these are the things we've implemented to keep it as secure as we can. And I think it would be fair to say that there is no online facility that is 100% secure. It's like telephone. Telephone calls can be recorded. Other people can be on those calls and you're not aware of them. So I think any platform, even face-to-face meetings, when we were holding meetings in our office, I would often say to parents, this meeting can't be recorded. We'd have terms around that. But again, there's no certainty somebody's got their phone in their pocket or in a bag. So I think as a profession, we need to move with what's happening and accommodate the security and safety issues as they arise, and to ensure that we've implemented them as much as we can for the families we work with.
Yeah, as you said, Shelby, there is no perfect system, and you made some really good points there that we, just because it's a new platform, it doesn't mean to say that those things couldn't have been happening previously. We just need to be aware of them and have mediation agreements that cover off on those things so that people understand the rules by which we're playing.
And I was reading an article about the Zoom bombing and the worries that are being raised by people. And one of the comments from a cyber expert was, we had these same worries when we introduced the telephone, and there were concerns at that point that the telephone was never going to be used as a main platform for communication. And I think we've had the same issues with fax and email. And so I think we just need to be mindful that there are concerns and manage those, because what are the alternatives? The alternatives are that we don't provide a platform for families in need to be able to resolve their concerns.
Yeah. So Shelby, it was interesting that you talked about the length of time of meetings, and I just want to circle back to that, because there's a lot of people having to work from home at the moment, and a lot of the people you'd be dealing with, at least one of them would have kids at home at the moment because the schools are closed, although it's now school holidays are for some people already, and some are starting. So to try to carve out a 3-hour meeting chunk would be really, really hard. I imagine, even especially with the little kids, they seem to be the ones that friends who are parenting from home, homeschooling and working from home are all finding a challenge. It's the littlies, and trying to keep them amused for even half an hour would be challenging. And I'm just wondering if you've had any families that have had challenges around that and how they might have managed it.
We sure have. And I think most people at the moment are working from home, either one parent or both. And I'm actually working with a couple of families where both parents are living under the one roof and they've separated, and they are trying to resolve things. So we're working very carefully with that family around what are the needs of the family. Are there young children? Are both parents able to have what I call semi-privacy? Because I think historically we've all worked in a space where children would never be present during a meeting of some sort, unless they were, very, very, very small babies. Now we're having to be creative around how can we set the children up in the home with activities. Is it that the parent can be upstairs or at the back room? Is it that we can have video conference with the acknowledgement that children may come into the room? If they do come into the room, we will all stop talking and allow that parent a break. Also talking to parents that are under the one roof about how can you share that load? Can one of you go into the car, or can you, I know I used to say go to the beach. Now you can't even go to the beach, but being really creative about how can we give semi-privacy to each parent as well, and keeping the meetings short and structured to the point where if they need to end because of a child, we all agree to that. If a parent needs a break to go and set a child up, again, we agree to that. If it is that the parent with the child will agree to set themselves up as much as they can, have snacks available, get creative. It's okay for children to watch TV or an iPad for a little bit, let them play, those sorts of things. So being really listening, I guess, to what the family needs. to enable the meeting to take place.
And I think flexibility is a word that you just said, and that's really important, not just for meetings, but also for the arrangements that people are going to make during this time. We have no idea how long our lockdown, I think that's what I'm calling it, is going to go on for.
Yeah.
And earlier on you said people are doing things differently now from what they did 3 weeks ago. And I expect that people will return to you to further develop plans, because just as children get older, this situation is going to develop. And so Victorian schools, I think I saw announced they're going to reopen,
yes.
But they only want children to go if they really have to. So it's really for those essential workers. So we can expect that the situation is going to be longer and ongoing, and it's going to get tougher for kids. And what's put in place for them now, while it's still a bit of a novelty for them, will, times may need to change. It may be that kids are going stir crazy and people need to change the structure of their arrangements, and that maybe a week in between houses, maybe that needs to it might be too long for everyone. It may be that people decide, you know what, instead of having changeover on a Friday, we're going to do it on a Wednesday, and then each parent gets a portion of the working week. It's not changing the amount of time, but being flexible and going, you know what, maybe Wednesday would be better. Then the kids get a break, we get a break, everybody gets the weekend in between. And I think being flexible and creative will really help people get through this, rather than being rigid and saying, well, that's what the orders say, that's what our parenting plan says. Maybe there's a different way we could do this so that it's easier for everyone.
I think that's absolutely right, Gemma. And also people who have previously relied on, whether it's daycare, whether it's grandparents, whether it's third-party carers such as an au pair or a nanny or a neighbour, those restrictions now are impacting parenting arrangements. And so families are having to reassess each of their needs and how they're going to make that work without the assistance potentially of third parties. So I think that's really helpful to reassess it from the, I guess, as parents, our own needs. And I'm talking to you now I've got 3 children at home. So you might have a cameo appearance, but I think if you can talk to your children around your expectations and really allow them to talk to you, have family meetings, have a dinner table conversation, and then share those with each other as parents.
Yeah, and I think having that time where we are off our devices and we're not watching the news and we're focused on the children, because we're asking them at the moment to just be absent while I work for a whole day, or while I have a mediation session. And there needs to be some time away from all of that for them. And I've heard some people with stories of kids acting up a bit. And when they stopped and reflected, they realised it was because they were on their electronic devices all day working, and the kids were on the electronic devices and they weren't getting any attention. And if we know one thing from the 20 plus years of family law we've each been doing, it's that when kids don't get positive attention, they'll go for any kind of attention and they'll act up and they'll misbehave because that's a way of getting attention. So if you are coming into a mediation or a parenting coordination or a meeting with a lawyer, I think setting your child's expectations of what time you'll be finished. And if they're old enough, give them a time. Say, right, I'm going to be done by this time. If they're small, you might have to be more creative. It might be you get 5 episodes of Peppa Pig and then I'll be done, or something that they can understand so that they know when it's going to finish, and then they're less likely to interrupt. And so long as you communicate that, I think, to everyone at the beginning of the meeting.
That's it.
Yes, I do have time constraints. I've told my kid I'll be off by 12.
And let everybody know. And I was doing a recording the other day, and there were a number of professionals on there. And I was very upfront at the beginning. I have 3 children at home at the moment. And it was amazing once you shared a little bit about yourself, how the other participants, who are normally very astute, strict lawyers, were saying, I'm doing the same. We're all juggling, and then we just accommodated that through the meeting. So I think that's right. The other tip I would have, and I do it deliberately, you can see that I've got headphones on. So my children can't hear what's happening. And if I was doing a mediation, I certainly wouldn't be in an open space. But I think if you can wear headphones, then your children can't hear the conversation. You can still hear them, because they're not, unless you've got blockout ones, but it just gives you another level of, I guess, semi-privacy in that conversation.
Absolutely. And my experience is that the sound quality is better for everyone else as well.
Yeah, that's probably right.
I've got my robot earphones in.
Yeah.
So Shelby, you mentioned before, just to change topic completely, that you were dealing with a couple who are separated under the one roof. And it occurred to me that the longer this situation goes on, I wrote a blog article on it, that we're likely to end up with babies or divorces. And it might seem a bit tongue in cheek, but already in China, now that they're coming out of isolation, they're seeing an increase in divorces. And we're potentially going to have a longer lockdown situation than they've had. And time together, you know, absence makes the heart grow fonder, or go yonder, but being together can do the same thing. And if there's already issues, it can exacerbate those. And something that occurred to me is that there might be people who are worried about how do they separate? What do they do? Do they have to wait till the end of lockdown? And I thought that the collaborative process might be helpful for those people who realise this is not working. And staying together for the sake of the kids whilst you're in lockdown and not having a conversation about it could actually make the situation worse. So I wondered if you could offer some thoughts around how using collaborative practice or even mediation, but collaborative sort of springs to mind as the most obvious here, to transition through a separation under the one roof when you're actually just separating whilst you're in this isolation situation.
So I think for your listeners, a really brief explanation of collaborative is an out-of-court process where we form a team to support the family to transition through their separation and then into what I call two family units. When I say we form a team, there are expert family lawyers involved that specifically have trained in collaborative law. You may have someone like me who is called a coach or a communication specialist. You may have financial professionals assisting. You may have child experts assisting. So whatever that family needs at that time, we form the team to help them through. I guess the other pertinent component of the collaborative process is we're looking at what it is that each member of that family need and how do we get outcomes that meet those needs. Whereas I guess in a much more traditional family law approach, we would be looking at what does the law say and what is the likely range or outcome for this family. We, in the collaborative sense, work the other way. We ask the family what it is that they are worried about, what's keeping them up at night, what's important to them. What do they value? What do they want their family unit to look like in years to come? And then as a team, including the members of that family, primarily the parents, I'm not talking about the children, but we work to achieve those outcomes.
And I practice as a collaborative family lawyer. I'm not a neutral coach. And I think it's important to really highlight that my job as a member of that team is to advocate for my client and make sure that I help my client articulate their needs. I also give advice about the law, though, because at the end of the day, we don't ignore the law. It's not a warm and fuzzy process where we sit around holding hands virtually, singing Kumbaya. It's still, the settlement still needs to be something that either a court would be comfortable as a consent order, or that the lawyer feels comfortable signing off on. And
there's
a
certainly robust conversation during those meetings. That's absolutely right. It's not a process where everybody is just sitting calmly and it's a placid conversation. Let's be real, when you are separating, emotions are high. The job of the team is, and my job as the neutral coach, is to manage the emotions, give space for everyone to have a voice. And I was on, I think, Jennifer, you were part of it yesterday, an international collaborative group where somebody made the comment that collaborative is a balance between advocacy and the needs of the client. And what they meant by the needs, I think, is the emotional, physical, social. So you absolutely have the opportunity to have your lawyer, and your lawyer is there for a purpose. The lawyer is there to give you advice, walk you through the process, to reality test proposals, to come up with options around how we might resolve it. I guess it's not as strategic as some of the traditional methods.
Yeah, I think it's, as a collaborative lawyer in that process, I would behave very differently from how I would in a litigation matter. And one of the fundamental principles of collaborative is that everybody's making a commitment that we're not going to court.
Yes.
And signing off on that as a contract. So for me as a lawyer, my job is to work with my client and the other party and with the team to help these parties reach an agreement that is legally binding. That's my job, and all the things that I need to do to help facilitate that. It's not to try to rake mud up about the other person. No. It's not to prepare for court. I'm not a gladiator in that scenario at all. I'm there to understand that these parties often have children. They might not be young children, they might be adult children, but even adult children really need their parents to get along. And I always use the example of imagine your children's 21st birthdays, their weddings, your grandchildren. What do you want those occasions to look like? Do you want to be the parents who, when the guest list is being drawn up, the kids go, oh no, we have to have mum or dad. They can't both be there, or they can't sit at the same table, and all of those sorts of things that we do see happen. They happen all the time. And for me, it's a process that means it's far more likely that those things will go smoothly in the future, because it's about preserving relationships. And I guess that's where I was coming at with the separation under the one roof, that because it's a different process, that might be an easier way for people to navigate a separation during isolation.
Right, because I'm thinking of the family that I gave the example of living under the one roof, and as issues are arising, the team of professionals, so both of the lawyers or the parties, the parents are reaching out to me saying, this issue has arisen for us, we need to deal with it. That team is able to call a meeting, and at the moment it's via Zoom, so we're calling a meeting within a number of days typically. We're setting some time aside, we're setting the family up that are managing children in the background, and we're able to work through that issue as it arises, rather than war of correspondence or big delays. I think we can all be in agreement at the moment. If you are looking for court dates, unless there is absolute urgency, you're just being pushed back. So we've got to find ways to work for families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shelby, thank you very much for chatting with me today. I'm sure that's been really helpful. Your children are probably wondering what Mum's doing. It might be morning tea time now. So thank you once again.
You're very welcome.